So you mentioned that focus on quantity, right? So why
Yes.
focus on quantity? Because most of the time in school, in work, everyone says focus on the quality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How does quantity matter over focus on quality?
Well, so there's some fascinating research that was conducted by our colleague Bob Sutton at Stanford University. And there's other research I can reference later if you'd like. But
Mhm.
basically, the truth is, it takes a lot of ideas to have a good idea. That's what Linus Pauling said, the only individual to win the Nobel Prize twice, right? The chemist.
Yeah.
He said, to have a good idea, you need to have a lot of ideas. But the question then comes, well, what's a lot? How many is a lot?
Mhm.
And when I ask most people that, something like, 20 or 30 or 40 ideas is how many it takes to have a good idea. But if you define good as commercially successful, most of us in business are trying to achieve a commercial success. The number is more like 2,000, actually, meaning
Wow.
you need 2,000 ideas to get to the point where it's likely that there's a commercially successful idea in there. And that's really staggering to most people. Most people are thinking in terms of, 50, 60, whatever.
Right.
And so they're multiple orders of magnitude off. And so, there's a famous study conducted by a gentleman named Dr. Dean Keith Simonton. He recently won a Lifetime Achievement Award from Mensa, the organization that awards IQ. Okay, so he's clearly a brilliant researcher. And one of his discoveries as he looked across uh, professions, not just the arts, but also science and invention and engineering, his discovery was that the most creative or the most successful practitioners of various fields were the most prolific. And the times where they had their best contributions to their field, again, whether it's art or science, is when they had their most contributions. Interestingly, by the way, that time period is also when they had their worst contributions. So it's
Mhm.
not just that you're getting only good ideas. Far from it. You're actually coming up with more bad ideas too. And that's one thing that I think is worth mentioning. If you think about ideas, you can think about them like a natural phenomenon, just like height or
Mhm.
whatever it is, right? And if you plot natural phenomenon on a distribution, you get a bell curve, right? You get a normal distribution. Ideas, generally speaking, the quality of one's ideas fall on a bell curve, meaning you have a lot that are pretty average, you have a few that are really brilliant, and then you have a few that are pretty silly.
Yeah.
And what most people try to do is they try to get rid of silly ideas. They don't want any silly ideas. And what they don't realize is silly ideas are the way you get to good ideas. It's not that good ideas are necessarily come from silly ideas, but they come from the variability that a mind that's willing to have and share a silly idea is able to engage. And the variability is key. One of my favorite stories about this, it comes from Sir Johnny Ive, who was
Mhm.
speaking about his collaboration with Steve Jobs. And he
Mhm.
said every day we'd have lunch together. And every day Steve would say, "Hey, Johnny, want to hear a dopey idea?"
Mhm.
And he said most of the time the ideas were pretty dopey. In fact, sometimes they were truly terrible.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, they would take the air out of the room because
Mhm.
they'd be so tremendous. Right. And the point there is Steve Jobs knew what very few of us do, which is if you want to get delightful ideas, you got to have dopey ideas. Right.
Yeah.
Nobody ever thinks of Steve Jobs and thinks that guy's dope. We don't think that,
Yeah.
dopey.
Mhm.
We think of customer delight and disrupting industries and redefining categories. But to get to delight, you've got to be willing to be dopey.
Yeah.
And that's so critical. Again, this idea of it's not about quality, it's not an orientation towards quality. It's an orientation to be willing to every day have and share bad ideas. And if you're the kind of person who every day has and shares bad ideas, you dramatically increase your likelihood of being the kind of person who stumbles across a great idea.
Nice. That's amazing. Yeah, and totally I agree with you because there is a famous, I think, quote from Einstein when he was asked, like, why did he still keep on trying to make the light bulb after I failed so many thousand times? Because he said that because I figured out how many ways not to do it.
Yeah, it's great. I love that.
Yeah, I think it was 4,000, but don't quote me on that. But he never gave up because he knew it's going to work, and these are the things he got out of the way. So that's really,
Mhm.
really